I'll try to remember before you get going.
Thank you. Stacy's like my TA for this class. Okay, like I get a TA. Woo! Anywho, all right. So I'm gonna start with a Bim Bam video, as we do. And since I'm seeing the bunch of you who have already done some things, I'm not going to start with my conversion video. I'm going to start with my Torah video. We are going to look at the most elemental parts of Hebrew religious writings, our texts, because they are the thing that hold us together. So here we go. I'm going to share my screen. I am going to go over here, and it is going to look a little something like, oh no, now I got to go find my thing. It disappeared. I'm going to have to go back here, back here. There she is.
Hey, Sarah here. So usually when Jews talk about the Bible, they're talking about the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, plus 19 other books that together make up the Hebrew Bible, or Tanakh. This is to distinguish the book from what non-Jews call
Okay, let's start this over again, shall we?
just plain the Bible, which includes a New
Oh
Testament.
dear. Oh
so
dear.
Jewish protest, Old Testament is not usually a term that Jewish people use because it assumes the existence of later holy texts.
I am
now,
going to
introducing
go
the word
here.
Tanakh.
I'm going to go
it's
here,
an acronym.
and I
Stands
am
for
going to
Torah,
put this
5 books of
on
Moses.
hold if I am allowed to do so. All right, now I want to turn this on, and hopefully everybody can hear. Was the level okay? You could hear? Okay. Nico, we're kind of starting from the beginning because this is the beginning of our cycle. There you go. All right.
Hey, Sarah here. So usually when Jews talk about the Bible, they're talking about the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, plus 19 other books that together make up the Hebrew Bible, or Tanakh. This is to distinguish the book from what non-Jews call just plain the Bible, which includes a New Testament. So Jewish pro-tip, Old Testament is not usually a term that Jewish people use because it assumes the existence of later holy texts. Now, introducing the word Tanakh. It's an acronym. It stands for Torah, the 5 books of Moses, Nevi'im, the books of the prophets like Joshua, Jeremiah, and Isaiah, and Ketuvim, writings. This is the book of Ruth, the book of Esther, Proverbs, Psalms. All together, they make up Tanakh, and it's a Jewish way to say Bible.
Okay, now we are going to stop our share. Woo, complex. All right, so that was just like a little overview.
If you open a Protestant Christian Bible and look at the table of contents, you'll notice the first 3 quarters is a collection called the Old Testament.
Okay, let's close that, and let's go back to our Zoom class. Hello. I love it when YouTube automatically plays things. It's so awesome. So in any case, that was just kind of an overview of how Tanakh works. Tanakh is the word for the Hebrew scriptures, the Jewish Bible. And I'm going to go over here to showing you some structure that will show you how it works a tad. And it's going to go a little something like this. Hang on just a second. All right, so can you guys see that? No? Okay, I'm sharing my screen here, and we're going here. There we go. Now, I think you guys can see that. All right, great. So here is Torah, the earliest part, then Nevi'im, and then Ketuvim. This is the Torah, which are those first 5 books, like you see in the scroll. The Nevi'im are the books of the prophets. The Ketuvim are books called writings, and those are much more poetic and narrative books. But you'll notice that this outline shows all these other things under Torah. And that's because when we say Torah, we mean both the written Torah that's in the book and the traditions that explain it. Explaining it, understanding it, and processing it is a really important part of Jewish Torah study. Yes, I will share that, or I will do something. All right, so going on, and we're going to look at approaching the text. All right, Jewish literature is an inverse pyramid. The 5 books are at the base of the pyramid, which expands into all those other kinds of commentary, literature, and explanation. Studying Torah is the core of Jewish practice. We don't read it, we study it. Now that sounds mysterious, and that's what I'm going to go to right now. I'm going to stop my share. And I'm going to first say a greeting to Jay Shupak. Rabbi Shupak is here. He's working with Gerim, people who are studying to become Jews in Yakima and in that area. And he and I are kind of coordinating so all of our students can get all the learning they need and they can get the halachic conversion they need, which is going to be awesome. Rabbi, do you have anything you want to add?
No, other than I'm late, which is a very traditional Jewish thing to be, which is late. So if you're normally late in life and you become Jewish, then you have a wonderful excuse. You know, you're following the Jewish tradition of being late. But I had trouble finding the link, so that was that's my excuse. But anyway, how fun, and it sounds wonderful. So I don't want to interfere in the class. So
That's okay. I want everybody to like meet you and say hey and everything.
hi.
Yes. Right. And for those of you who are part of Congregation Beth Hatikva who are studying for conversion, take a good look. This man's going to be on your Beit Din. So, okay.
Oh, I'm really tough too.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to go back to my little Tanakh lecture. And I want to share my screen and show you my study slide that I only just now got a hold of, which has been really, really great. Here's the layer. Well, first I'm going to show you my layers of Jewish text, which go a little something like this, right? The Mishnah, the Talmud, the Midrash, and the commentary. Those things are called rabbinic literature. And what that means is that people who have studied and thought about the whole Torah, the whole Tanakh, our Jewish tradition, our Jewish history, and all of our Jewish experiences over time in the world have come up with lots of different ways of writing about that, explaining it and discussing it, coping with what happens and how our tradition, how our Torah lives with us over time in the world and in our individual lives is what our scholars teach us. We don't ever just look at the Torah, the Nevi'im, and Ketuvim and say, it literally says this right here. It says this right here in English. There are a lot of people in the world who do this kind of literal way of looking at these writings. But in Judaism, we are meant to understand them in the context of all of this tradition, all of these scholars, and add on our own experience. It's a challenge. It's a real challenge. And it's one of the reasons that it's super hard to be Jewish. You'll enjoy it, but it's a challenge. It's an intellectual challenge to understand things, but it is also an emotional challenge to cope with it and sort it out and swim through it and not feel like an expert. There are very few absolute answers. Mostly what our teachers teach us is there are few absolute answers. There are only responses. Absolutism is not frequent in Judaism. It is out there. We've got some of it, but it's more of a topping than the actual ice cream of the sundae. So, having looked at these, I want to take a special look at our first book, the very first book, which is Torah, the first 5 books. I'm going to stop my share for just a minute and talk to you about those. Now, when you see a scroll in the synagogue, you see a scroll and it is in the ark, you know, it's in the special cupboard that we have for it, and it's all wrapped up. What's contained in that scroll are the first 5 books, popularly called the first 5 books of Moses, and that is Genesis, which is called Bereshit in Hebrew. That is Exodus, which is called Shemot in Hebrew. And that is also, I got to remember the English, Leviticus, which is called Vayikra in Hebrew. Numbers, which is called Bamidbar in Hebrew. And Deuteronomy, which is called Devarim in Hebrew. Now, what I'm going to do right here is I am going to open up this here document and I'm going to share it with you. And it's going to go a little something like this. All right. So what we're going to do is we are going to rewrite that while we're talking. Okay. So Genesis is called Bereshit. Bereshit. And Bereshit shows you how we name our books. We name them after a word in the very first word or the very first sentence at the top of a section. And the word Bereshit is when began, at the time that creation commenced, at the time of this beginning. So it's almost like you're coming in the middle of a sentence. And it doesn't start with, boom, this particular time, this one thing, there was nothing, and then boom. It starts with when this creative process was beginning. And that's the word Bereshit. Bereshit. Oh, not Shemot. I'm going to say Exodus. All right? And that is called Shemot. And Shemot means names. Names. Why in the world would we call a book names? Well, if you take a look at the beginning of that book, Exodus, you'll see a big list of all the families and the names of characters who end up at this point in the story, who come to Egypt. And so we call that Shemot, names, because the very top of it is a list of all those people. All right, here's another one, which is called Leviticus. You've probably heard of that. And people usually call it Leviticus. They used to call it Leviticus, or rather in Christianity it's called Leviticus, because what they're noticing is a lot of ritual rules for some ritual workers in our temple in ancient times. And they were called the Levites. They were the family of Levi, the Levites. And so when scholars later on, Christian scholars start looking at that and looking at those Latin translations, they want to say, okay, this is about those ritual workers. However, in Hebrew, we call it Vayikra. which means, and he called. And that's because the very beginning of Leviticus is God calling and saying, hey, this group of people needs to be in charge of these rituals. So it's the idea of them. So those two titles are actually expressing very similar ideas. Okay, here is Numbers, and that's a hard one for me to remember because it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But it's Numbers is what this chunk of book is called. For us in Judaism, it's called Bamidbar. Bamidbar. And that means in the wilderness. Not only is that part of that beginning verse that they're in the wilderness, but also it expresses the stories that are happening in these books of Numbers, that they're about the Jews being in the desert and trying to figure out how they're going to do what eventually will become Judaism. How do they live their lives? What's right and wrong? What is their society going to look like? All of those things are happening in that, and they're in the wilderness. The next one is, I think I spelled it, Deuteronomy. Hard for me to remember, but there you go. Deuteronomy. This means, this is interesting, it's real relevant to us. Deuter, to, nomi, second saying, the word, second word. And that makes tons of sense, because what's happening in this book is that Moses, we call him Moshe in Hebrew, Moses is retelling all the people their whole story. And he's emphasizing and explaining certain parts. So it's a retelling. His emphasis and his explanation means that this book, which we call Devarim, words, because these are the words, this book, the second retelling where Moses is explaining, emphasizing, repeating, and rewording in a way to help it be understood, is our first layer of oral Torah. This is where we start. This is where the tradition of understanding and teaching really manifests in all of our stories. And this book shows us that this is our way of engaging with Jewish religious scripture, with our holy texts. Moses teaches us that. And for this reason, the character of Moses in the story is called Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our teacher, because he's showing us not only how to get the Torah, how to have a spiritual experience, how to be a leader, how to be a follower, all the things that Moshe does really, really well, Moses does really, really well. But here in this Deuteronomy book, in Devarim, he's showing us how to study and teach Torah. And that's really important to the way that Jews engage with Torah. All right, I'm going to do a new share, and it's going to look a little something like this. If I can, oh, here's my windows. Here we go. Let's see. All right, here we go. And I'll share that. All right. So I just found this this diagram that this student did. It's from a student's class, so it's got some typos on it, but I still think it's a beautiful, beautiful diagram. So what she was saying is that she wanted to draw what it looks like, what Jewish sacred texts look like. So here's the first 5 books, the core of everything, and all of our studies come out from it. But it's an inverse pyramid, because we don't just say these guys exist in a vacuum. They are all by themselves, and all you have to do is look at that. There's no all you have to do. In order to understand this, we have to incorporate and learn these things. It's a huge, huge thing, but it's a beautiful thing, and it becomes very natural, and it becomes a place for us to explore our experience with text throughout our lives as Jews. We never stop learning. I'm going to stop my share for just a second and go to my, yes. A key way to understand this is to look at our language. In Judaism, and especially in we use Hebrew as one of our holy tongues, right? Because that's the biblical Hebrew is the language of our scriptures. But we also have some more modern languages. We have a language called Yiddish that you've probably heard of, which is an Ashkenaz language, meaning the people of Jews of Eastern Europe used that. And we have a language called Ladino, which is the language of Jews in like Spain and Italy and places like that. I digress. In Yiddish, we have a phrase, we have a way of speaking where we don't say we studied the Torah, or we don't say we don't say that we read the Torah, we say that we learn it, we study it. Learning and studying are of a piece, both in Hebrew and in Yiddish. Sometimes you will hear a very learned person, maybe a rabbi who's, the head of a school or something, super smart and been studying all of these things for years and years and years and teaches it and all this stuff. And still, when you ask how your kid is doing in his class, he'll say, I enjoy learning with your kid, right? You learn with your students, you learn with them. And that expresses the value of our evolving and always in process study of Torah. We don't just memorize and say it says exactly that and we're done. We don't do that. We know that this is bigger than all of us. It's a big job, and all this study gives us an amazing gift and an amazing lens with which to view the world and to understand things, an amazing learning process that we find that we can apply to all things, and it helps immerse us in a dynamic relationship with our community and with God. So, I want to stop for just a minute, and I want to know if anybody has questions or comments at this point. Come on, you guys, I'm sure you do. Okay. If not, I'm going to carry on. Oh, wait. You got one, Stace?
Just basically Midrash and Mishnah. I'm always confused. Midrash, I know, is like stories that fill in important points.
Mm-hmm.
Mishnah seems so similar to me.
The words sound similar, but they're totally different.
Oh, good.
A midrash is, as you said, it is a kind of storytelling, allegory making to help understand weird things in Torah, or unusual or important points in Torah, or values in all of our learning. It's a tradition of allegorical storytelling that we have. Mishnah is how to figure out what all the rules are and how to make them work. And this is really important. I'm really glad you said this, Stacy, because I'm actually going to go to this a little bit. Mishnah, and I'm gonna share my screen. I'm gonna do one more screen share even as we talk. Here is our timeline of oral Torah, right? It's a little bit fuzzy, but hopefully it'll show you. The Mishnah is down here, and it starts getting written down around the 1st and 2nd century CE. CE is the scholarly term for the Common Era, which used to be marked by the times in Christianity. We don't use that anymore because CE pins it down to a particular time as opposed to basing it exactly on when some people conjecture the great events of Christianity happening. So around this time, they start writing down the Mishnah. Before this, it was all people discussing. And what it is rabbis looking at the rules that are in the Torah, right? You know about the rules, right? A lot of rules we got. Not just the 10 Commandments. We've got 613. Oh my goodness gracious. And as you look in Torah, you're going to see more and more rules. Always do this. Never do that. At this time, do this thing. Some of them will make sense because they're going to be about ethics and doing the right thing. And some of them are going to be very odd because they're going to be ritual things. And many of them will seem very outdated and not relevant to our lives. What Mishnah does is all these rabbis in the olden days look at all those rules and all those structures and they go, how do we do this if we don't live in exact Bible times, if we don't live in an exact Bible place, and if we don't live even with other Jews? How do we live? You know, in the ancient world, everyone lived very tribally. Your tribe was all in one place, and you all did your things in your place as you had planned to do. But as the age of empires grows, tribes start getting moved around and dispersed. Lots of environmental change happens. People move all over the ancient Near East. They're going, wait a minute, what does it mean? How do I do being in my tribe when I have to go to this weird place where I'm the minority? And in Jewish history, that's really important because we get usurped a lot. There's one great moment in our Tanakh that we talk a lot about. It's the exile. Being kicked out of the land of Israel and being taken way over here to Babylon. And if you like reggae music, you have heard a lot of talk about being on the shores of Babylon. It's exactly that. That is exactly what those psalms and those reggae tunes are about. They are about the separation from place and people and trying to decide who you really are and how to do Jewish in that alienated place. People start going, wow, is this just about the place that I live in and my house and my friends all around me? Or is this about something bigger? So Bob Marley goes ahead and writes a beautiful reggae song. And our teachers, our Rabbanim, start going, how do we be Jewish in this weird place? We don't even call ourselves Jews at this point. We're still Ivrit, we're Hebrews. How does the Jewish God even work? What does it mean to have one God? How does that change when we live in Bavel? Does God like us anymore? All of those challenges happen. And in order to cope with that, they start writing down ideas to interpret and ideas to figure out how do we still be who we are and follow our rules and have meaningful practices even in weird situations all over the world. Why have Jews continued to survive despite everything, even the popular history you know about, right? Christianity was a very successful religion, very successful. And it worked really well in the ancient empires and became the standard religion for all of Europe and all of what used to be the Roman Empire. How is it that our small religion has persisted despite great difficulty and great challenges living in that world that you'll learn over time in Jewish history? How is it that we have survived many, 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 many historical challenges that were basically genocidal? How did we do it? We have a tradition of understanding who we are no matter where and how things are going. We do not restrict ourselves to place and time. We do not restrict ourselves to being Jews only in certain situations. And because of that, it's given us a spiritual practice of understanding every time and place we are in, figuring it out. Who are we? We've learned new things. We've had science. We've had history. We've had different places and different times. We have learned more and more and more about human beings and how they even work. My goodness, if you even think about the past, 50 years in our world, right? How much have we learned? And yet, the Jews persist. Our God does not disappear because of science. Our Torah does not become irrelevant because there is truth. We understand it more and more and in more diverse ways over time. It's an intellectual challenge, it's a spiritual challenge, and it's an emotional challenge.
Emily?
Yeah.
When they were captive in Babylonia and Babel, it says, our captors required of us a song. And then they said, how can we sing our God's song in a strange land? And that's the core question that they asked then, 586 BC. And the answer to that question is everything else, is all of Jewish history. The rest of everything is, how do we sing our God's song in a strange land? Yakima, nothing against Yakima, but it's a strange land, right? And it's definitely a strange land compared to Israel. So that's the core. If you ever, how do we sing God's song in a strange land? We could sing it in Hawaii. We could sing it on the moon if we were on the moon. We could sing it on Mars. We could sing it in Zimbabwe. You can sing it anywhere. So that's the answer to that question, is what we know as Judaism.
That's right. Thank you, Rabbi. That is a beautiful word. I love it. That's really gorgeous. Another thing I want to say about that, which I love, there's this story about the rabbi speaking to the Dalai Lama after the Chinese had totally invaded Tibet, and the Dalai Lama was in exile. It was terrifying. The Tibetan people were just decimated and devastated. Many people were able to flee to Nepal, thank God. And so I think it was the Lubavitcher Rebbe he was talking to, but very traditional Orthodox rabbi. And the Dalai Lama met with this Orthodox rabbi and said, how have the Jews persisted? Because these Tibetan people were in a position that was very similar to what has happened to the Jews repeatedly over history. And the rabbi said, our tradition is what carries us. Torah is what carries us. Our God is what carries us. When he says that, he doesn't mean memorizing the Torah. He doesn't mean knowing things word for word, even in Hebrew. He means understanding, studying, and growing. Always being in that growthful place. As Rabbi just told us, learning to sing the song of God in a new land, in a new place, in a weird place, in a hostile place, in a happy place, all the places. Because what we find is that the song and the melody is going to change. We're going to do a million new melodies. And we're going to reinterpret the words in a whole bunch of different ways. But that core thread, the song itself, that's never going to change. And that's what holds us. That's what binds us. All right. Do I see another question? Did I see another Shayla? Michaela? Yeah. Michaela, ask me a Shayla.
Well, I was just going to say, there's this book that I'm teaching in school right now to one of my classes, and it's about this Native American man who is a veteran of World War II. And there's a scene in the book where he goes to this native medicine man who a lot of people in the tribe don't like because this man is adapting the songs. And there's a scene where the two of them talk about how songs have had to be adapted because the medicine can't withhold the new weaponry that has been brought into the world from thousands of years ago. And he even uses the phrase, those who are pure are going to die. And it made me think of the class that was last spring about Second Temple Judaism and how the, to use your words, Emily, purity people were not the ones who survived that destruction. It was the people who were willing to adapt and willing to hear that song. So I just thought that was really interesting how this is even connecting with something that's going on in a different context, but a similar understanding.
Beautiful midrash. And I think that it's really meaningful to us because we can see how this kind of thought is so sustaining for many people in their different ways. It has helped us adapt. Yeah, and I want to bring also a little piece from secular religious studies that scholars of religious studies have found over a lot of study that the religious or spiritual groups that endure over time and endure through adversity are those who process and adapt. Process and adapt. That we re-evaluate and we restate our core values. We hang on to our core values. We go, what is important? Humans are important. Love is important. Compassion is important. Hang on to that. And then we adapt those. Having that ethic at our core allows us to adapt to whatever we are coping with. And we see this cross-culturally. We see this with other people who have been through challenges. We've seen this through other people who have done well, you know? And then what happens when they are no longer doing well? Sometimes they kind of implode. And the more one has to hang one's hat on absolute mirroring of what we did last week, you know, absolutism, the absolute purity and the absolute literalism of something without taking into account that everything has history. The literalism tends to make people inflexible and tends to not be sustainable outside of their own context.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's the phrase Lo hametim hallelujah, the dead will not praise Yah. So when it came, there were groups of Jews, for example, that would not fight on Shabbat. They wouldn't, if they were attacked, they wouldn't defend themselves on Shabbat. Well, they died. Okay, so they have no children, they have no culture to pass on, and it says Lo hametim hallelujah, the dead will not praise Yah. So first you have to be here. First you have to survive and remain identifiable as Jews, and then you get to keep the mitzvot and you get to do all the things. But the first thing is you have to be here. The first thing is you have to be you have to survive. And it is, I mean, in nature, the ultimate judge, if you will, of intelligence is the survival of the fittest. So if you do something perfectly, but then you can't pass it on because you're not alive, it's of no value. You have to create something that's sustainable and you can pass it on. And that's just, that's just a little add-on to what Emily was saying.
I like it, Rabbi.
Great.
Thank you. So one of the things that is different, that is not different necessarily because lots of people have different ways of doing things, but that is a specific thing about Judaism that we want to hold on to is the idea that intelligence and study is a value. We don't tell people, you have no business doing that. We say, no, here's how you do it. You get a teacher, you get a friend, you get a book, you study. We don't tell people, do not question. We tell people, please question. Please ask questions. Ask me a Shayla. That's what I say to Michaela because it rhymes. But we question, we analyze, and we question. Any assertion that a person makes about how to be a good Jew, how to be a good person, how to do our tradition, should be able to be questioned heavily. And usually it's going to shake out that there will be some different opinions, especially about our ritual practices. Many different opinions about those things. And that is something that we have to live with. We have to live in the tension between I know this and I know that. We have to live with a lack of absolutism about some things. And it's very challenging. We value intelligence. We value study. We value science. We value critical thought. One of our great theologians who taught probably more to people about our commandments, our mitzvot, than anybody was a guy called Maimonides or Rambam. Rambam is a great model scholar for us, and he's from way the olden days. He's from a long time ago. He's like 13th century guy. What was his main job? He was a doctor. He was a doctor because he needed to support his family and he needed a good job. But there was no conflict between his learning about science at the time, and he was living in the Arabic world where people were allowed to learn about that, and his study of religion, his study of Judaism and how to be a Jew, and his study of Torah and ritual practices. He was not in conflict with that. He knew that the value of healing people meant that he was doing a great mitzvah by continuing his scientific studies. He knew that. And he should be a model to us of how to integrate those things. In Judaism, even many of our own most fundamentalist people will acknowledge that science is real. And it's something we take pride in. As a matter of fact, in our daily Amidah, that means our central prayers that we are traditionally saying daily, in tradition, you'll learn about them later. One of our prayers is that we are grateful to God for giving us knowledge and for sharing the ability to think about things and understand and to figure it out. The idea in Judaism is that God wants us to do that. It is what God wishes, that we use the intelligence we're given and that we exercise it in the world. And that's a really basic thing that is very different about Judaism to some other religions. Not all, but some. Having to do all that stuff means a lot of intellectual work, a lot of psychological work, a lot of emotional work. All right. I am going to stop once again, ask around, see if I got any questions or comments on that one. About the process? No? Okay. All right. Now, another quick share, because this is our introductory class, and I know none of you guys are really officially introductory. Well, I think Kenya just started. This is our kind of overview class. I'm going to quickly share with you another slide that I love, and this is our Torah year slide. Wait, that's not what I want to do. Don't do that. Hey now. Hey now. What happened there? Just a moment. We're going to go to my slide. It disappeared there. Well, hang on just a second. Is there another? My goodness gracious. Wow. There we go. Good deal. All right. All right. Sorry about that. Here we go. All right, so here is our Torah year calendar. I love showing people this because it really shows how time works for Judaism. It goes round and round, and it circles back on top of each other and reminds us of every other time that exists before, exists after, and all the things associated with it. Now you'll see that we've got spring, summer, winter, autumn, and fall right here in the middle because it's kind of showing you where these times go. Now right now we are in autumn right here. We just had Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Simchat Torah, which I was sick for, but all of these things, all of these important holidays just happened here. And what you'll notice when you look at this is that our very first Torah portion starts right here, Bereshit. I showed you that book, that's the title of the book. And this little section of Genesis, of Bereshit, is our first Torah portion. The Torah portions are assigned weekly throughout the Jewish calendar year. So all the Jews all over the world are reading the same chunks of those first 5 books of Moses. We're all sharing these chunks. So the very first one was Bereshit, and then the next one was called Noah. And I'm sure some of you are familiar with the story of Noah and Noah's Ark. And that was this week's Parsha. That's what we read on Saturday if you were here, or if you were in Yakima, or wherever you were. Or even if you couldn't make it. That's what we were doing. And the next one that will come up is Lech Lecha. And that is where the character of Abraham will be introduced. And he is going to start on his journeys that will begin the Jewish people. This is happening all over the world. And each week has its own little teeny chunk that it's assigned. And then some of our holidays have special pieces that we go back and look at, or we go forward and look at, because we're reminded of what the rules are around that holiday or how the holiday got started. We'll circle back and look at that at the holiday. Not always, but sometimes. Along with each one of these little chunks, we also do little mini chunks of the books of Nevi'im, those prophetic books. And I am now going to do a new share with my document, and we're going to go here, and I'm going to show you how that works. So the Torah portions are weekly. All right, they are the same all over the world, and they are the same all over the world. Well, I would say they're all over the Jewish world, I mean. Jewish world. Okay? So the Torah portions are weekly, and they're the same all over the Jewish world. The Torah portions are called parshiot. Parshiot, which is Hebrew for portions. Torah portions. Or the Torah portions. And the singular is parsha, which means Torah portion. All right, singular. And you'll hear that sometimes, parshiot, Torah portions, and parsha, Torah portion. This is how we get through all those 5 books over and over and over again every year. Now, if you remember, I showed you a slide earlier about that inverted triangle of Jewish study. Well, that seems crazy to us modern Jews because, frankly, we read the Torah portion every week and we call it good, often. But what those Torah portions are supposed to be doing is helping us circle back to that very basic beginning, because the tradition assumes that the rest of the time we're looking at all of this other literature, that we're thinking about the law, that we're thinking about our traditions, we're thinking about commentary, we're thinking about the rules, we're thinking about ethics. So having the Torah read every week is supposed to bring us together at this level because of the story of how God sends the Torah down from Sinai. And that's another thing. I'll stop my share right here. So one of the, oh, I see Chris's hand. Is your hand raised, Chris? Or is that someone else's hand? Oh, it's my hand. Duh. Okay. All right. So one of the things that is different about the way that Jews read Torah and the way that other people read Torah is the idea of where Torah comes from. Now, certainly, there are a lot of scholarly ways to examine this, but I'm talking about the great mythic narrative of where Torah appears from, where we get it, and what that tells us about who we are. The story for non-Jews is that after all the Jews escape from Egypt and they go to Mount Sinai, that Moses goes and talks to God and brings down the 10 Commandments, right? Just like in the Charlton Heston movie. In Judaism, what we teach, our great story, is that when Moses goes to Sinai, goes to Mount Sinai and talks to God, God writes for him the Torah. And when I say the Torah, I mean all the Torah, the Tanakh, and all of our tradition. Why in the world would we have a story such as this? That sounds kind of nuts. I mean, we obviously know that rabbis wrote down the Talmud and the Mishnah, and we know that commentators have written great stories about it, and we know that the Rambam wrote all his stuff. We know that people wrote that. Why would we say that God writes down everything? This story, even when we don't take it literally, shows us the idea of Jewish text as being a body of literature, as being associative one to the other, as being interconnected. That Jewish text is a web, right? We invented the web page, I swear, because so much of our writings are full of links. When we read anything, there will be references to other places in Jewish text. When our rabbis of the Mishnah, who are the people saying how to do Jewish laws in different and weird places, and they're having a conversation, it's all their conversation and their discussion, and sometimes their fights. When they talk about those things, they will use phrases that are quotes from all of the Torah and Nevi'im and Ketuvim. And they don't all go in a row. They quote this, and they quote that, and they quote this, and they quote that. Because they're showing the way that the text works in this very, very intuitive, very associative way. Every time a Jew sits down to look at a Jewish book, we are not looking at it linearly, we are looking at it associatively. We are reminded of other things. We find that there are other things we maybe should read before we get to this one. We ask questions. We are referred to different points in the same exact book. It's confusing, but it's how we do. Jay, you look like you're about to say. So, Rabbi.
Well, I just want to say, and Michaela, I can share, right, about what we're doing this afternoon?
Yes.
Okay. So Michaela's going to put a mezuzah on her new apartment today. And she has a new job in Yakima, and Yakima is her new town. And we didn't plan it this way, but this is Parsha Lech Lecha. coming up this week. Go, you will surely go. And there's a reading in the Reform Siddur about making changes in your life and about great changes and new challenges. So the whole thing fits together. We don't just take the mezuzah and stick it on the wall and then say the blessing and then go home. We tie it to this week's Parsha. We tie it to Michaela's life because she moved into a new apartment, which is why she has to put the mezuzah up in the first place. And she has a new job, which is why she has a new apartment. So, and she moved here from Tri-Cities. So she's following Abraham's footsteps. I mean, he left Ur, and he went north and west. So we're able to tie all those things together because they're not in a vacuum. They all go together, and it flows through her life, into her life, and through her life. But she can now tie her life to 4,000 years of Jewish history and to this week's Parsha.
Nice. That's awesome. That's a beautiful, beautiful thing in your life. It's a beautiful example of how Jews live with Jewish literature, how we live with it. It is in our lives. As a matter of fact, there's a famous quote in the book of Deuteronomy, Devarim, where they're talking about the Torah itself, and they say, Lo bashamayim hi. The Torah is not a magical thing that is far away. It is right next to you. It is not in heaven. That's what that means. It means that it's not some inaccessible, untouchable document. It is for you to look at, analyze, and understand and discuss. That's what it's for. It's what it's meant to do. I have another little, since this is our first class, even though I'm familiar with all you guys, I have another little wee caveat I'd like to say about reading Jewish scripture that I think is important. First of all, the lack of literalism is really important, that we have to analyze, understand that this is all written in biblical Hebrew. And our translations are going to lose some things. We're going to miss a lot in translation. But the same way that there's all different translations, right? Talking about the Hebrew is something really deep that scholars also do. What does it mean? That we analyze and we go on. The other little tiny caveat, which doesn't seem relevant, but I'm going to bring it because a lot of new people who are seeking and people who are studying come to me with, is the understanding of the word prophet, right? The understanding of the word prophet. Now, in American culture, very often, and basically in Christian culture in general, there is an idea that a prophet tells the future, and that prophecy is a foretelling of the future. The word in Hebrew for a prophet is a navi. Nevi'im means the prophets. A navi is not magically predicting the future. A navi is interpreting and finding spiritual meaning and resonance in the events around and in the meta events over time. They're not saying magically this is going to happen. They're saying this is the result of this behavior. They're saying this is the cost of this behavior. They're saying this is how we should aspire. They're saying we have suffered. What is the meaning of our suffering? What is the meaning of our joy? A navi is synthesizing and expressing and innovating. They aren't telling the future. If you went to a navi and you said, what are the lottery numbers, right? The navi is not going to tell you what the lottery numbers are, right? There's not a magical prediction of the future. And when we read throughout our Torah, throughout Nevi'im, and throughout Ketuvim, as some of you may have done already, maybe you've had that experience at different points in your life, we have to remember that we're not scanning those pages looking for a magical prediction of the future. We remember that the words that are there are bringing us great understanding, mythic understanding. And by mythic, I don't mean pretend, I mean great meta understanding of how things in the world affect us, how we are who we are in the world, and how the world functions the way it does, why there is evil, why there is good, why there is life, why there is death, all the big questions. All those writings are to help us reflect on that and chew on those things. They're not telling us to go put cans in our basement because a magical heavenly battle is going to happen. That is not what's happening here. And I know that that's kind of speaking to literalism, but I feel like we encounter that stuff in American society, and I think it's really important to know that we are not required to do that, and that is not how Judaism works. That's not how Jewish study works, right? We're hoping to help everybody find their spiritual way and be carried by our tradition, be carried by Jewish ideas, be carried by Jewish ethics and Jewish growth and Jewish life. We think we are a really good way of doing that. We think we've got some pretty good responses to the challenges of the world, and we're happy to share them. We don't think everyone else has to join up. It's fine. They have a boat. They have their own boat. They're doing well. We don't tell people they should be Jewish. They can enjoy, live and be well. And just like in our video, if anybody decides at any point, listen, this is a little crazy, it's not for me, that's fine. That's fine. You're still a good person. It's good. But as we go, we're going to be exploring how this boat that we call Judaism carries us, and how we can be both the captain and a sailor, and sometimes the fish in the water. All right, I'm going to wrap it up. If there's anybody who has comments, questions, last. Michaela.
Really quick, you showed that one graphic that had the Torah portions. Does Tibet, besides Hanukkah, not have a holiday? Does it have a fast day or something?
Does that decide Hanukkah, did you say?
Are there other holidays in that month besides the end of Hanukkah?
Oh, Hanukkah, no. Okay, so here's the thing, right? I'm just going to throw this out there. Okay, so after the High Holy Days, Baruch Hashem, we get a break. We get what's called Mar Heshvan, the month of Heshvan, which is called Bitter Heshvan because there's no holidays in it, unless you're a rabbi and you like it, and it's Happy Heshvan. And and then Kislev is the one following that, and that's where our celebration of Hanukkah comes from. That's where that is. And then you'll follow along and you'll see as our year goes, different lesser observances and greater observances are going to happen. And you can just follow along. No, right now, this is a beautiful time to start. And the rabbis knew that, and that's why we're in Bereshit. This is a time to start. It's for starters, right? At the time of beginning. And we've already had years and years and years, 4,000 years, right? We've already had that.
It's also, I want to say, it's a statement of faith to begin in the fall. Normally, like in Roman cultures and a lot of cultures, you begin in the spring. Mm-hmm. But we begin in the fall in perfect faith that there will be a spring.
That's a really good explanation of emunah, the idea of faith in Judaism, the idea of that aspirational, optimistic mindset. Even as we cope with difficulty, we hold space for difficulty, for pain, for sadness. We also hold space for growth.
Right, but it's counterintuitive because the days are getting darker and the days are getting shorter.
It makes sense. It makes sense.
But we know that that's just a phase, and we know that it's going to go around the other way. So we just...
It's so different.
It's very nice.
It's so different than a lot of ancient, there's some things that come from an ancient culture where there's an idea that, oh my gosh, we had better do this so the sun comes back, right? You have to propitiate the sun coming back. And in Judaism, we're saying the sun comes back already. We know this. We know this. We know that there is a universe. We know that creation functions. Thank God. Right? Anybody else got any more questions? Yeah, Nico, go.
So when you were showing the Wheel of the Year, I noticed that there was a list of names sort of on the inside, and I was very curious about that.
Well, that's from that artist, okay, Rafi Metz. And
Oh.
likes the idea that and there's a lot of backup for this. There's a lot of very different texts talking about all those guys are like the 12 tribes of Israel, the guys who were the sons of Jacob. And there are some thinkers who are kind of thinking about what they symbolize and how they are kind of associated with, in the ancient world, people thought a lot about astrology. And a lot of ancient rabbis said, no, there's not, 12 zodiac signs, there's the 12 tribes. It was their spin on ancient learning and ancient astrology. And Rafi Metz, who does that artwork, is kind of into it. So we just leave it.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's really fun. There in the ancient world, astrology was our proto-astronomy. That's how it got started.
Right. Yeah. I know we invented it. Whatever.
In the ancient, we went, astronomy, yeah. All right. Okay. You guys are all awesome, but I have an assignment. Many of you may already be doing the assignment, but I'm going to give you the assignment. Your assignment is to read the Parsha every week, right? Read the Parsha and show up at a Zoom service of your choice, anywhere on the web. Get crazy with it. As long as it's a synagogue. You can write me and ask me. Sometimes it's not. And I've got to say, I'm here. I'm leading Friday night services every Friday. And I think, Rabbi Jay, are you doing the same?
Not every Friday, no. We have, I think our next thing we're doing is the 22nd. There's a Friday night. We do twice a month that I lead. And then we have lay leaders here too, which Michaela is in the process of becoming one. She is quite wonderful at some of the tefillah, and she just sings beautifully. It's just wonderful. And then we have John Jones, and we have a whole group, that so there's lay led and there's rabbinic led, and
cool.
So we're here some and we're not here some, and that's the deal.
That's my dream too. I want that back. So I'm starting to teach the class. It's going to happen. So in any case, between the two synagogues, you can just go to our websites and down and show up whenever you can and read that Parsha, even if it's weird, because I promise you it's going to be weird. And we can discuss. Just bring it. And I will also send a link to the Bim Bam videos, which are awesome summaries of the Torah portion. Okay. Love to everybody.
I was just really going to ask fast, are you doing Tuesday class as well?
Tuesday class is going to be Siddur and Tefillah, that class. So you can hear what I have to say about it. Hopefully I don't contradict Rabbi Jay.
Is it at 7 still on Zoom?
Yeah,
If
7
you
o'clock.
do it for the sake of heaven, so it's okay.
Beautiful.
Awesome class. Thank you so much. This is great.
Bye, you
Thank you,
guys.
Emily.
So fun. Peace out.
Good to meet everyone a little tiny bit. So yeah. See you.
Bye-o.
Bye.
Bye.